Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I thought I'm going to talk just a little bit, and then I'd like to open it up for questions because I much prefer that people ask what they're interested in than me just keep talking. But I thought I'd start, before I start talking about what's going on in education today, I thought I'd do a little teeny bit of history and basically go back to 1999 when I was researching on the history of US higher education and its costs. And I realized at that time that the rising tuition, way out of proportion to normal inflation, was caused by the government loans. Basically, the seemingly free money suckering a lot of people, especially the financially naive, into spending a lot of money on going to colleges. And then the consequence of that, it ended up in that respect becoming a kind of welfare to colleges. Between the government loans and the ideology that everybody should go to college, that the college educated were the only ones that made more money, and that we should all go, it encouraged many, many, many people to go to college that weren't able to finish. And it ended up actually causing a tremendous credential inflation. Partly also because lower education has become so bad that employers use college now to kind of vet people that they are good enough to work in. It could be in a management position at McDonald's, for example, running a small store. Then the 2008 recession really hit young people hard, and they started to question the value of college. They started to think, well, maybe we should go to coding school. Maybe we should start a business without college. Interest in the trades started increasing. But accredited colleges still had a chokehold on higher education, and students still felt the need to go. Then we come to 2020, and we end up having this huge shift where college students are forced to be educated online. And I'd like to ask you, if you were a college student, did you find this a shocking experience, especially considering how much money you're paying for going to college? You know, it's kind of like, well, what's the point of paying all that money for something that in many respects you can get for free online in the MOOCs or at Khan Academy or many other places? MIT has all of their courses online. I mean, many think that going to school, does give you the advantage of networking with top professors, with students, especially at select schools. But I'm not sure how advantageous it's been for people that are going elsewhere. I mean, there's always great professors at every university, and if you can find them, then they're going to really teach you a lot. And many students go to college for the experience of living on your own, but kind of in a sheltered way, developing friends. However, they started questioning, is it worth the money? And so there's been this gigantic switch to online because of COVID, and it's caused a wake-up call, I think, an even further wake-up call with college students. You can do so much online. What are you getting in person when you go to college? Are you getting the kind of education that a personal and in-person education should be giving you? Also, there's a big question about many people who end up having to listen to lectures online. Shouldn't they be top-notch? Are you getting the money you're paying for if you're getting kind of mediocre lecture? There's an advantage to it being online, which I often have thought that anybody who wants to give a lecture should really hone their lecture and put it in a video so that the students can watch it whenever they like, and then use the class time to really discuss the meat of what was said in the lecture. But some of the other things that are very concerning about what's happened with colleges, I don't know how many people know this, but only 38% of students are graduating from major public universities in 4 years. On average, it's now taking the rest of them 6 years to graduate from college. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One is switching majors, another one is switching universities, another one is classes not being available. But with these additional 2 years, it's basically costing people an extra 40% in tuition and other costs. And unfortunately, minorities are hurt the worst. with these problems in college. Their graduation rate is 50% or less. And they often end up leaving college with a lot of debt, but without a credential. Unfortunately, the colleges have a tight grip on the job market because of you're needing the credential in order to get into a lot of jobs now. Hopefully this is loosening, and more students might realize that the loans really aren't free money, that you're going to have to pay them back. I think that's become much more known in the public. Now, getting to what's happening with college this year and how the COVID is actually helping to cause creative destruction, the colleges are facing a huge drop in enrollment, something like 15%. And there are many, many articles out there, research articles and otherwise, from anywhere from Business Insider to HuffPost, about how students are starting to think about taking a gap year because they're not sure if their college is going to reopen. They don't know if they want to go back and continue taking it online and paying all that money. I think that it's clear that the well-funded colleges are going to survive this. You know, places like Harvard or Grinnell or Princeton that have huge endowments, they're going to be able to weather it. They're well-funded. Many, many people want to go there. But a lot of the lesser schools are going to have a really hard time, and I suspect there's going to be a lot of closures. Now, one of the advantages of this is there may be drops in tuition, and that could be really great for college students. One of the things that happened over the last 30 years with this increase of tuition and the colleges basically having a lot of money was they started having administrative bloat, partly because they could afford it and partly because lots of new regulations came in along with the loans, saying they had to have this kind of department, they had to have that kind of department, overseeing whether they were implementing Title IX and everything else properly. However, something that's really concerning to me is now with the over-the-top cancel culture, even science schools are caving to some of this pressure. I don't know if anybody'd seen the recent article in The Atlantic about how science schools are acceding to the idea that there are different ways of knowing, that because of one's experience, the truth was actually different from one person to another. And that's a thorny issue. I mean, certainly people have different experiences, but when it comes to science, there are certain definite ways in which we know and we don't know. So what should a college student be concerned about right now? Maybe what should they be considering? Business gurus like Seth Godin are talking about a gap year, and he says, for a student, it's actually a bargain. It's a chance to set off the carousel of conformity and lockstep obedience and actually commit to a path of your own choosing. Keep your tuition money and put it to work for you, not for a football team. So given this, how can students fruitfully decide what to do? And how much is the college experience worth it to them? Can they get it elsewhere? Can they use their money in a better way to get the kind of experience that they would get at college? At this point, I think students should be asking, you know, what is their best path in the long run? Should they go to college? What should they go to college in? Do they need help figuring out what is the best path for their future? Or should they put their college money into opening a business or going into a trade or really learning a craft well? Is college right for everyone? So with that little bit of information, I just thought I'd open it up for any of your questions. Our particular program at the Great Connections specifically aims to prepare you for the future. We've organized our curriculum so that students will get a chance to ask themselves lots of questions about how should they live with other people, how do they know what's right and wrong, and look at the ideas of people that have influenced our civilization the way it is right now, and decide for themselves what ideas they agree with and what they don't. And we also have a lot of practical experience and help in issues like personal finance, learning about economics, the marketplace. So we've tried to prepare a program that will really help a student in the long run decide what's the best way to spend their money and their time. So anyway, I was wondering if anybody had any questions or issues they wanted to bring up or objections to what I said.
So I was thinking about what you said about online school lectures, having to pay so much money just to sort of like Skype a professor, you know, once a week. So I'm a college student, and at my university, online tuition is more expensive than in-class tuition. And I've noticed that since COVID, so a lot of my classmates have really struggled with keeping themselves motivated. It's, I guess, like now that they're not on campus anymore, they like can't bring themselves to study and do their homework. And that's like, I feel like I have the exact opposite. Like I feel like I have more time now. But my classes, we never meet in person. They just upload their lectures. You basically teach yourself. And that's a really big change. So but one of my questions is that, you know, I went to college immediately after high school because I felt like I had to. You know, you're sort of beaten into your brain, and at least in public school here, that if you're quote unquote smart, you go to college, like you don't do anything else. So I didn't question it. I just immediately applied to college and went. But this idea is so deeply ingrained in our society. How do we even go about addressing that? Telling kids not only is it okay to not go straight to college, but it's probably a good thing to really consider what you want to do and not just sign on the dotted line and be in student debt for the rest of your life.
Well, I think there has to be a lot of discussion about it and asking what are students actually learning in college. What I often hear from students is they were really looking to go to college to be challenged, to learn some really great ideas, to have deep discussions about the issues of life and what direction should they take, and you know, how should our society be organized. And they get there and they feel like it's just high school again, where they're just learning whatever the teacher says, taking a test and getting, you know, the grade for their credential. So a lot of discussion has to go on. And the good thing is that if the colleges are being put in a position of difficulty financially, they're going to have to respond to this. So in that respect, the market should help.
Do you think that if there are like tangible steps, if you will, that we can take to sort of change public perception, or is it a much bigger thing that is going to have to like trickle down, for lack of a better term?
Well, I certainly don't think it'll be easy to change things, because, I mean, except if students stop going to college in great numbers. That would have, and 15% is a gigantic hit to anybody's bottom line. So in that respect, colleges have to figure out, well, what are they going to do? And are they going to make themselves more attractive? I mean, we're talking about, of course, the colleges that are the most sought after aren't going to have as much of a problem, right? But there's many, many other places that people are going. I mean, I just saw an article here in Chicago about how the state universities are going to be in a lot of trouble because of this, because they've had a lot of kids not enrolling when normally they would have. So in that respect, if we have a financial change along with a lot of talk about what the problems are, I would think that could help move the circumstances along quite a bit.
Thank you, that makes sense. Teresa, I see you have your hand up. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. So thank you for holding this. So I work in higher education. I'm getting my doctorate in higher education. So I've looked into a lot of these issues that you're talking about. I agree with a lot of what you're saying about this push to get everyone to go to college when it's not really necessary. Credential inflation. I mean, I can speak personally. Hiring my assistant, it was a joint effort. But I was forced to put that it required a bachelor's degree, even though I didn't think that it should, and it absolutely is mind-boggling to think that someone with just a bachelor's degree and 2 years of office experience would be in any way more qualified than someone with no bachelor's degree and 10 years of office experience, right? So credential inflation is absolutely real. And I also, I've looked into this, I guess what's referred to, I suppose, is the Bennett hypothesis of this idea that the federal loans is really what's driving up the cost of higher education. I think there's some support to it. I think there's mixed support. But what I really bang my drum on constantly is the effect of the U.S. news rankings on the cost of higher education, and trying to, and on administrative load, because it's really this race to show yourself in the U.S. news rankings, which their methodology, in my opinion, has very little to do with any sort of output of what you're learning in college or what colleges are producing. So I wondered if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, and the U.S. news rankings, I mean, they seem almost empty to me when it comes to actually looking at what education students are getting. There's a wonderful organization called the American Council of Trustees and Alumni that has a very rigorous methodology that they use to analyze the curricula of colleges and universities around the United States. And they have a whole ranking system for that, but they go into detail about, well, what's actually taught. They have lots of publications, but you can go on their website. It's GoACTA. Here, I'll put it in the chat. Well, it's not ORRG, but you get what I mean. And what I really like about them is that they look in detail at what the students are getting as far as an education. They did any number of studies, one of which was that college seniors knew less about American history than college freshmen. And I think that's pretty ridiculous. So they have tools there where parents can look at the different colleges and what their curricula are and how they're ranked, which I think is really helpful for helping to decide what's actually the most valuable education you can get. So in terms of what to do about it, I think we just have to be really outspoken about these problems in education. And you know, Savannah, you were talking about how you're mostly listening to lectures and then having to teach yourself. And that is really unfortunate, because it seems to me that if you have a knowledgeable professor, the value of that person is that they can guide you in trying to understand the material you're supposed to be learning. But if you just get a lecture, you're not getting that. So, well, in my opinion, the teacher's falling down in what they're supposed to be doing. And yet you hear this all the time, that it's just go to a lecture, take a test, you know, write a paper. You're not getting the kind of in-person answering of your questions. And one of the things I find is a big problem is that students don't know how to ask questions. They're so used to just being fed the material that they even when they get a professor who's great and is trying to encourage them to ask questions, they don't know how to ask them, or they almost feel burdened by being required to ask questions. And it's unfortunate, because when you get out in the world and you're working, you have to be asking questions all the time of yourself about how are you doing your job? How is somebody else doing their job? What is the best way to do it? How do I find out? If you don't have any practice in doing that, it's really a problem when you go to work. I don't know if that answered at all what you wanted to say. Did you want to add to what you said, Teresa?
No, and I'm sorry, like, I know that wasn't quite related to COVID in the current situation, but that's really like my big issue in higher education. But yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. Yeah.
Great. And I wondered if Sam would like to weigh in or not, because he's a professor at Tallahassee State.
Florida, thank you, Florida State.
Florida State,
So, yeah, we're
In
the
Tallahassee.
40,000 student behemoth of North Florida. But anyway, Marsha, I agree with just about everything you're saying on this. And I've been at Florida State since 2011. I think the most important thing, and I came from the nonprofit private sector. So I have not been born of and grown in the beast of the bureaucracy. I'm actually someone that came in, and I was actually hired as a change agent for a particular center, which I've now created it's now an experiential learning lab for undergraduates.
What's your area?
Yeah, so I'm in the College of Social Sciences and Public Policy. It's a public policy think tank, but I'm interdisciplinary, so I can work with anybody, and we have working partnerships in numerous colleges, and I have about 30 students in the academic year, plus faculty and staff that I work with. But I think, Teresa, your question was kind of interesting because, it actually got me to think about this in a little different way. What I find is that in practice, the people that are having the most impact are the people that are committed to the institution and doing well. So there are a couple ways to look at this. One is if you are doing well at your institution, use your voice, because your voice makes a difference. Once you're out of the institution, continue to use your voice and engage. There's a lot of research, and I would love to just double down a little bit on what Marsha was saying. So the research shows that the students that have the strongest connection to their institution over the long term are the ones who have developed meaningful relationships, not only with their peers, but their professors. So the whole online push is really undermining the very character of the education and its long-term viability. And in Florida, where we have multiple universities, state universities, Florida State's going to be fine once we get through COVID-19. There's the University of Florida, but there are a whole host of other, literally dozens of other four-year colleges that are going to really, really be hurting because people are asking this question: why do I go? Why should I be going to pay all that money for tuition, and I'm not really getting any value out of it? So I think we're definitely, I think we're going to see about, I'd be surprised if we don't see at least a quarter of the colleges and universities disappearing over the next 8 to 10 years. Because of what Marsha's talking about. And I think they're all good questions. What are the questions? What value are we adding? And when we can add that value, then it's worthwhile. It's not well clear that most of our universities are providing that value added. And I would, by the way, put the elite institutions in the same category. It's when someone goes to Princeton, they're going for the network. I'm not actually very impressed with their actual education that you get there, which is different.
I can't agree with you more. On top of which, so many students think that it's a great place to go in terms of how they're going to network and do well afterwards. But I'd like to know what the statistics are on exactly how many people who graduate from these Ivies are really super successful. I've known a lot of people who went to Harvard, University of Chicago, Yale, Princeton, and I'm not particularly impressed with what they've done with their life. It's not like they're all superstars or something.
Well, actually, yeah, I think going back to a point you were raising earlier, Marsha, I think it gives us some insight into this. There is research that shows that the most important thing for long-term success is grit and really just perseverance. And there are a lot of students that go into the most elite institutions and have gotten there mainly from natural intelligence that fits the testing that they're doing. And what I find is some of my best students have struggled early on because all the stuff they were they did in high school to get into the university doesn't map well into what you need to know when you're going to graduate, get outside the bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And so all my classes are flipped, which means it's all student-driven content. The students that do the best are not necessarily the ones that have the highest grade point in high school or did the best on the tests. So I would agree that the success rate is probably much lower than people think, but also keep in mind that the nature of those elite institutions, they're already getting driven people. So I think they would be more successful on average, in part because of the network, but I don't think you're getting the value added out of those elite institutions that people think they are. So I know people that have graduated from them that are coasting on their network, not really adding that much value. That's.
Thank you.
I was wondering if I could jump in for a second, just sort of to go back to what Teresa and Savannah were both asking about, and then kind of get your opinion, Marsha. So I previously worked at a tech company, which was started as a startup and then grew when I was there. And in terms of kind of like a changing the culture to move away from this, you know, everyone goes to college attitude, I saw a big kind of just cultural move at the company and sort of other companies like us, which was we kind of don't exactly care about certain elements of your resume. We're kind of looking at like the whole picture, the interview, your resume, what you can tell us about your experience, and looking for like the go-getters and not a degree, or I don't think anyone really cared where anyone went to college at that company. And then just to Teresa's point, I did have a position that I had to fill under me, and it did have to say a BA. But I personally, you know, had an interviewee who had no BA, and she wrote me a very long thank you letter for even considering her. And I guess I just thought it was really interesting, but I thought it was a good sign of the times that maybe there is some movement that way. And I guess, Marsha, I'm just wondering if you know, in your network, if you have heard similar things from business owners and the like.
Well, I know the business owners I know are all complaining to me about the applicant pool, that they get these applicants that have credentials up the wazoo, but they can't actually problem solve. This is a big issue I hear from business owners, is they're having a really hard time finding people who can problem solve. And I think it goes back to you know, what you were saying, Teresa, and you were saying, Sam, and Savannah, where the students are just being channeled through to. It's really funny because Plutarch, 2,500 years ago, said that students are not vesicles to be filled, but that you want to inflame their interest and their excitement and their imagination. So the same thing was going on then, right? Where you get students who would just sit and want to take in the lecture and not do a lot of work. But the bad thing about it is that we've encouraged people to be like that for so many years. The way in which traditional schooling has been teaching them. And the push, to me, what's ironic is that about 30 years ago, we were having a lot of problems in school, in traditional school, because of all of the progressivist policies that had been put into school, where they weren't requiring standards, they weren't requiring you to necessarily study all of the traditional subjects. And so there was a backlash against that. And when the Republicans got into Congress, they basically that's when they put in the No Child Left Behind policies, which to me were like the Soviet style stop down idea. Oh, we're going to have standards that everybody has to fulfill. And then they tied all the money that was coming from the federal government to the schools to what your test scores were like. Well, what was the consequence of that? Everybody started teaching to the test. And so that's why this whole mill of, studying for the test, taking the test, making sure that you're doing well on the test so that you can move on to the next level. That's how this got to be such a big problem. And so that's another thing. I mean, lower education really needs reform. And I wish that we could get the federal government out of lower education, because all of the data shows that the best results when you have a school, no matter whether it's urban, suburban, country, private, public, big, small, is if you have local control. So that the people who are actually going to the school are giving feedback to the school, and the teachers and the administrators who are running the school are deciding what's the best thing to do for those kids in the school. But we don't have that anymore. We have all of these state and federal guidelines that they're supposed to be following. It's a real mess.
Thank you.
Yeah, Peggy says the more it's been subsidized, the more disconnected from reality. Couldn't agree more. And we weren't even, Sam wasn't even bringing up, and I haven't even brought up the problem in the colleges of the ideological problem, where something like 96% of professors are Democrats. Okay, now there's nothing wrong with being a Democrat, but that's not a normal distribution. And if you go to college, I started seeing this years ago when I was going to college in the 70s, but it's gotten to be one of the worst pandemics ever, which is that the left owns the colleges and the universities. And it's very difficult for people of other points of view to even be allowed to get into positions of teaching those other points of view. Now, what does that do? What does that teach people? There's only one point of view? I mean, and of course, now with cancel culture, if you come up with any other point of view, you're immediately name called. So. Anybody else have a question?
Marsha, I did want to ask for your perspective sort of on the economic side of things. So
is that you, Mariana?
It's Holly.
Oh, Holly, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're fine. No
who's talking, because there's a bunch of people and they don't have their videos on, so I can't tell. Yeah, Holly, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So one of the things back when I was in school that my economics professor always used to tell us was to choose your degree depending on looking at the highest paying majors. So usually to look at majors like economics, engineering, the healthcare industry, to look at majors like this, to choose whether or not you should attend college based on the fact that there's more demand in these industries than there is supply. So he encouraged us to look on the economic side of things. So I wanted to ask you, for students who are considering whether to attend college or not, whether it's worth it for them, are there certain majors that you think are worth getting your degree in, certain majors that just wouldn't be worth, getting into debt and all the time that it takes obtaining that degree?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of majors that aren't worth getting into, especially because you're not getting a liberal arts education. In fact, what's in the original sense of the word. So the concept of liberal arts was you are going to be taught all of the knowledge and the skills that you need, like the reasoning skills you need to live as a free person. This is where why the word liberal is in there, because it comes from the same root as liberty. And so previously, what you were taught is the ideas of all the most influential thinkers in civilization, and you were taught strongly about how to write, persuasively, expositionally, if you want to do something in gratitude. You were taught how to reason very well. You were taught strongly in mathematics and some science. Nowadays, that's not what they're teaching in the liberal arts. They're teaching all kinds of very specifically ideological subjects, whether it's women's studies or Black studies or, you know, the power disparity. They're topics to be discussed. But if you get into those without a foundation in how to reason well and how to see, well, what is the history about things, you can't have any real perspective on it. Now, there are degrees which are like getting a credential in a trade, in a sense. If you go into engineering, for example, it's very useful. There's always up and downs in the market in engineering, but in the end, it should be a pretty solid job. So the question is, however, is that something that you particularly are interested in doing and can do, and will you live a happy life doing it, right? So if you are a person who'd like that, of course, that's a great degree to go into. The other ones, and different sciences too. You can't really get a job in certain sciences without a degree in that science or even an advanced degree in them these days. The other subjects, I think you have to look at them very carefully and look at where you're going. Is it the department that you're going? Are you really going to learn a lot from the people in the department about that subject? Are you going to learn it in a way that you can figure out, you know how to apply it in a practical sense? Can you go out? I know I read an article from about Stuart. His name is Stuart Butterfield. He's the founder of Slack, you know, that online app that allows workspaces. And he had gone to college I think he went to Oxford, and I forget the other place, and he studied philosophy and history of science. And he said the valuable thing about studying those two things was he learned how to reason well, and he learned about, in the history of science, how people went wrong, like where they didn't think right about it. They tended to think in a box about things, and then it sent them in the wrong direction and didn't really help them solve the problem. Now, it sounds like he got a pretty good liberal arts education, because it sounds like he learned to reason and to learn about history in the way that you needed it. So I guess that's what I would say about the other degrees, is I would be very careful about where I went to school and even what program that I went into in a particular school. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was just curious because I know that's something that, you know, was very tough for certain students to hear, that their degree that they chose wouldn't necessarily be worth it. But I think, you know, it's important for us to look, like what you said, where is it going to take us? And, you know, obviously how much debt we're going to take on versus how much we're going to get paid once we get that degree. So, yeah.
I mean, is there a way that you can get, you know, if you're going into something where you almost can't get the job without having a BA, but you know that you're not going to be going into a position like in science or engineering or something like that where you need the special training, is there someplace you can go where you can get the degree as inexpensively and quickly as possible, so you're not wasting not only your time but your money? Because every year that you don't work, you've foregone all that money that you could have made working. So I think students have to be really smart about their calculation about going to college these days.
I have a quick question for you, Marsha, and maybe Sam as well, but my question is for my daughter. She's actually going back to school to get her bachelor's. She already got her associate's before graduating high school through a dual enrollment program. And now, because Georgia has our Hope Scholarship, so she can basically go at no charge, choosing a degree, she wants something that would be useful. So she's thinking about getting a finance degree, like a bachelor's, a business degree focused in finance. And of course, wants to do it online. And for me, I feel like part of the
like the benefit of going to business school is for the networking opportunities, not just with your peers, but the connections that the school has with the businesses. And I'm just wondering, what do you think about, will it be a useful degree, do you think, getting a degree in finance online for her?
That's really tough. I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical about it, the online. Is she learning information that's really useful if you were running a business? Is she learning history of business that's useful? Is she getting a chance to interact with other students or with her professors in a way where she can really chew over the knowledge and the information about being in business? Then maybe if it's set up to be like that, then maybe it could be valuable. But you know, it's going to be costing a lot of money to do that. Maybe, I mean, unless you're saying she's getting it for free because of this.
Well,
so
you know, nothing's for free.
She's foregoing working all the time that she's going to business school.
Right, and that's the other thing. She's not working while she's doing, while she'll be starting the program in August. But I suppose you've answered my question, because it sounds like really the benefit is going to come from being in those specific classes that she's truly interested in, and getting the feedback from her professor and establishing those relationships, and maybe even pursuing networks is where the value is going to come from. And maybe, I see Sam nodding up and down, yes. Yeah. But I guess my concern is doing these classes online, maybe the core classes, and when you get into the more specific classes where she does see her interest in the future would be beneficial. And yes, to answer your question, it's part of the Georgia Lottery program. We have something called the Hope Scholarship, and it covers, I think, 80 or 90% of tuition.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who's on the other end of the pipeline, in other words, the people that are going into the professional world, and we track that very closely at the DeVoe Moore Center with people that go through our program. I really liked what Marsha said earlier when she differentiated between an education and a credential. And finance as a credential is a relevant signaling device in hiring right now. So I would say if she could get the finance stuff online and just sort of get the skills, that works, that could actually be very beneficial. But it's not a substitute for education. And it's not a substitute for connecting and developing that network with not only faculty, but your peers in your classroom. And I don't see how that's really being replicated in the online formats that we have now. They're actually designed opposite that. So it's, in fact, that's what we're facing here at FSU, is that if we look at the way the online classes are designed, they're actually working against the kind of networking that is so valuable as a practical matter when you go to college. Mm-hmm. So I kind of like that idea. You know, if you could figure out, if she can figure out who she wants to get to know. And the other thing is we're going to need new ways of getting to know faculty because if we're online. I'm struck by the number of students that I have when I ask them about the classes they've taken before they come into mine, which up until fall have all been face-to-face. And I say, well, and they talk about their preparation. I say, well, who did you have for that class? Who did you have for Principles of Economics? They say, I don't remember, I was taking it online. And that encapsulates the anonymity and of the whole online experience right there. It was convenient, but it didn't add any value in terms of these other things, which are far more important when you go into the professional world. So she'll have to be more intentional about who she wants to connect with, and then be aggressive in doing that, taking face-to-face courses if she can, but also reaching out outside of that, and then creating networks. That's an unfortunate consequence of COVID-19. We don't have these built-in networks.
Well, you know, the other side of it too is she needs to get a lot of practical experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't think anything substitutes for that, especially in business. And so whatever way, I think the the more entrepreneurial she can be about finding opportunities for herself to get practical experience, the better. Even if she doesn't get paid in whatever it is, you know.
All my programming is designed around developing professional skills in interaction and behavior for my undergraduates. And that's what you need to know. How do you work in a team? How do you create value? What are the practical consequences? And it's hard to do it in a traditional academic setting, but can be done, but have to be very good. So completely agree with you, Marsha.
Yeah, well, the thing I find, I mean, the programs we've had and the GAP program that we have really focus on a lot of personal interaction between the students and the tutors or the teachers in the class. Because that's where you get real dialogue about the ideas that you're learning. That's where you get dialogue about the issues and the subjects. And if you can create a very supportive intellectual environment, a supportive emotional and intellectual environment where the student feels like his question is actually welcomed. If he doesn't understand something, his question is actually welcomed, and he's being helped not only by his tutor, by his other classmates to understand the issues. Then you get a development, a team working together. You have to have the opportunity to have that experience and how to talk to each other in a very collaborative way, so that when you go out and work in the work world, you're going to be so far ahead in terms of your collaborative skills from other people, you can end up becoming one of the leaders in where you're working. If you know how to talk to other people and try to understand what they're saying, and then expand on what they're saying and relate it to whatever problem you're working on, these are huge skills to have, and you can't develop it online. It's almost impossible. You know, there's a whole aspect of it where you're paying attention to the other people in the discussion, and you're looking to see, well, who wants to talk next, and what do they have to say, and you know, you're watching everybody's body language. This is something really, a skill that's really important when you're working in real life, is to pay attention to that kind of thing. Can't do that online. The information you're getting online is very limited. Just like the fact that I was busy looking to see who was talking, and then it was Holly, because I didn't happen to look up there. You know, it makes it extra hard.
I would also point out that most universities and colleges have not really thought through pedagogy.
No.
In terms of how do you actually teach effectively. Most faculty are slotted in to a particular mechanism or means of teaching, and they don't even think critically about what they're doing. And so I'm a big fan of liberal arts colleges, because at least they're slotting people in a pedagogically superior way of teaching. But that's a thing that I think as parents we have to be very cognizant of, but as students as well. And you, as a student, you begin to understand that pretty quickly when you're in your first class with 1,000 students. Realize, what am I paying $50,000?
Yeah, what's ironic is that there's all kinds of regulations for teachers at the lower level in terms of pedagogy. Not that it's always that effective. I mean, I don't think that, but there's huge amounts of regulations about that, but there's nothing, you can become a college professor just because you're an expert in your subject, not because you have any knowledge about how to convey those ideas and that knowledge to the people that you're teaching. And you run across a lot of great professors, but basically they've tutored themselves on how to do that. So that's really unfortunate. And it's the liberal arts colleges do tend to focus more on the teaching skills, and I think that they have a lot of, they work together. The professors work together to share methodology and things like that. And in fact, it's very interesting. If you look at, there's some research that's been done for 25 or 30 years by a consortium of small liberal arts colleges, I think led by Oberlin. And they looked at, for example, where did the majority of people who are in who's who in the various fields, where did they go to undergraduate school? Because most of them, of course, went to top schools. If they're in who's who, they went to top schools for graduate school. And so those schools claim them. But it turns out that of the top 50 schools, so if you take all the people who are in who's who, you look at where they went to undergraduate, and you find out, okay, these are the top 50 schools where they went to school. 30 of them are small liberal arts colleges. Amherst is one of the biggest ones in terms of science, for example. But 30 of them are small liberal arts colleges, not the big universities. And it's obvious to me that pedagogically, the reason is because you're getting a chance to actually know your own professors. And your professors are spending time on making sure that you understand what they're teaching. They're not driven to be doing the research and spending time on that, so they don't want to spend time on actually teaching the students.
Okay, so we are going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you are interested in more events like this or joining a Lola chapter in your area, please feel free to either sign up for a mailing list on our website, ladiesofliberty.org, or email us at lola@ladiesofliberty.org, which I can put in the chat. Yeah, do you have anything else you wanted to say, Marsha? Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure thing. Well, I just wanted to mention again that the program we're working on combines a lot of in-person learning in the liberal arts and focusing on what individual students need to know before they move on to the next step of their life, combined with practical experience and knowledge in specific areas like personal finance, economics, marketplace. And we're aiming to really prepare a student to figure out, well, should they go to college? Where should they go to college? Should they go into a trade? Should they start their own business? We want them to be as successful as possible. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm going to put my email address in the chat in case anybody wants to contact me about our discussion or any projects they're working on. I would love to connect with you.
Someone is asking for your website.
Sure.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all.
Yeah, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Marsha. Thanks for
Thank you,
joining.
Marsha.
All right, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye.